Very happy to have a very close friend, both of Darius's and mine. And we're looking forward to hearing once again from Mr. Scott Ashley up in Colorado. Scott.
Okay, thank you, Robin. Uh, I'm I may go silent for a minute here. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully, okay, this is what I want to share. So I will ask.
Okay, Scott, if you go silent, Darius is next up in order, and he'll take the rest of the. Go ahead. Okay.
Okay, and let's see. I need to. Hopefully, this will work. I forgot the particular setting that should work here. So. All right, what you should be seeing is just an open Bible to two pages
Yes,
from Luke. Okay, well, good. All
we're
right.
on, Scott.
We're working all right. Okay, good. I cannot see exactly what I'm presenting, so, well, I can, but I can't see both that and the online view as well. So, um, our topic tonight is blessings and curses. One thing that sets apart the United Church of God and other Church of God groups, I like the word that Robin used, the diaspora, is our unique understanding of prophecy. And that understanding of prophecy involves our knowing who the modern day descendants of ancient Israel are, that they are generally concentrated in the English speaking nations of the Western world descended from the British Empire. So not the United States alone, but also Canada, Australia, South Africa, other peoples like that. So this is not a study to go into that. You can find that in our booklet, our study guide, The United States and Britain in Bible Prophecy. Goes into a lot of detail there. So my purpose tonight isn't to go into the historical proofs and evidence of that, because that would take up at least several class sessions to cover that. So it is thoroughly covered in this study guide and lots of other material on our website. So you can all go into that and look into it on your own. It would be a good time for a refresher if you haven't looked at this booklet lately. But when it comes to Bible prophecy, the fact is we cannot really make sense of the world without knowing the prophetic identity of the key players. And the United States at this moment is the world's only superpower. And I say at the moment because it won't always be that way. We know from prophecy that another superpower is coming, and Mr. McNeely covered that in his last class. And the Bible discusses in prophecy relatively minor players like Egypt and Libya and Jordan at the time of the end. But does it make sense that it would leave out the world's greatest superpower? At the same time, the Bible contains many end time prophecies of Israel. The physical nation of Israel today is a tiny nation of only about 10 million people, which is much less than the population of many of our states in the United States. So this is one of the reasons of many that we believe the prophecies of end time Israel are talking about the national descendants of Israel, the original ancient Israel, and not just today's tiny state of Israel. And among the Bible prophecies of Israel in the end time are some prophecies that are good, but many that are not so good. God made many promises of national greatness to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph that were unconditional. But those prophecies were never fulfilled in biblical times. God did say he would fulfill those promises, but he didn't specify exactly when, other than generally the end time. But because of what has been taking place in our nation, the drastic changes we have seen over recent years and recent months, I thought this would be a good time to review some of those prophecies because they tell us what is taking place in our nation. They tell us why those things are taking place, and they tell us where we are ultimately going as a nation and what we can expect in the future. And like many of you, I've also lived long enough and been through and lived through several national cycles of ups and downs, long enough to realize that there are times when the flow of prophecy tends to speed up, and at other times when it seems to slow down. And for the last several years, it certainly appeared that we were in a time when it looked like prophecy was speeding up toward the fulfillment of end time prophecies. But then we had the recent presidential election not that long ago, and now we appear to be set on course with a very different agenda to reverse the trajectory of the nation and to try to build it up again. So maybe we're entering a time where things will shift such that the fulfillment of prophecy will slow down in terms of what we understand will happen to the nation, and which we'll be covering in some detail here this evening. But time will tell. I mean, with Bible prophecy, the only thing that is guaranteed is that it will happen. We don't necessarily know all the details or exactly when it can happen, and unexpected events can suddenly come out of nowhere and change things dramatically and suddenly. Donald Trump, our president-elect, has already survived two serious assassination attempts on his life, and frankly, I don't expect those will be the last ones. And we have to keep in mind that there are always spiritual forces at work behind the scene to influence things toward those ends as well. And I guess bottom line, one thing I'm saying here is prophecy does not always go in a straight line or proceed at the same pace. So keep these things in mind when it comes to the subject of Bible prophecy. So with that preface, in this particular study, I want to cover one long prophecy that is an overview of the story of ancient Israel, both good and bad. And because prophecy often has dual or it is often dual or has multiple fulfillments, this chapter we'll be covering is also an overview of the story of the modern descendants of Israel. And that long prophecy is found over in Deuteronomy chapter 28. We're familiar with it as one of the two blessings and curses chapters, the other one being Leviticus 26. There's a lot of overlap between those two chapters, so we'll only cover Deuteronomy 28. It's longer and more detailed, so that's what we'll be covering tonight. And that's pretty much the only place we'll be covering, and I will be showing all the scriptures online here. So we call these the blessings and curses chapters, but they're actually an extensive explanation of human actions and the prophesied consequences that result from those actions. So that's why I'm using this title for tonight's presentation, Blessings and Curses, that actions have prophesied consequences. And one brief sidebar to this is that many of God's laws are self-enforcing, meaning that breaking the law brings its own punishing consequences. And this is summed up very well in Jeremiah 2 and verse 19, where God says, your own wickedness will correct you, and your backslidings will reprove you. So prophecy, our decisions that we make do have prophesied consequences of that. For example, we all know and understand that flaunting God's laws about marriage, sexual relationships, things like that, can lead to consequences like venereal disease, AIDS, devastating to the homosexual community. Brings other bad consequences like divorce and fatherless homes. And that in turn results in increases in poverty and crime and child abuse and substance abuse and all kinds of things like that. So we're familiar with that concept that sin is self-punishing. It doesn't directly involve God's intervention to have to bring about these consequences. Just breaking the law in itself leads to these kinds of consequences. And we also, on a somewhat higher level, can't ignore the fact that a drop in moral standards weakens the very fabric of any society. And if it's not reversed, that makes a people or a nation a tempting target for military attack and conquest, as has happened throughout human history. So, whenever we're tempted to think that God's laws don't apply to us or are no longer in force, we should just have to consider the consequences of violating them. And this is certainly a major part of the inherent message here in Deuteronomy chapter 28. Let's take a look. Let's consider now the context for this prophecy here. Deuteronomy 28 is very near the end of the book of Deuteronomy. When was the book of Deuteronomy given to and through Moses? It was given just before Israel crosses over into the promised land to be established as a nation after having spent generations in slavery in Egypt and in wandering in the wilderness. So, in this long chapter, God describes in great detail what would happen to the people of Israel if they obey his instruction and what would happen if they disobeyed his instruction. And we'll first read about specific blessings that God promises for obedience. And I will be reading this evening from the New Living Translation, which I think makes a lot of the wording considerably clearer in these prophecies. So, what does God tell us here? So, beginning in Deuteronomy 28 and verse 1, if you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully keep all his commands that I am giving you today, this is Moses speaking, but he's speaking on behalf of God. The Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the world. You will experience all these blessings if you obey the Lord your God. Your towns and your fields will be blessed. Your children and your crops will be blessed. The offspring of your herds and flocks will be blessed. Your fruit baskets and breadboards will be blessed. Wherever you go and in whatever you do, you will be blessed. The Lord will conquer your enemies when they attack you. They will attack you from one direction, but they will scatter from you in seven. The Lord guarantees a blessing on everything you do and will fill your storehouses with grain. The Lord your God will bless you in the land he is giving you. If you obey the commands of the Lord your God and walk in his ways, the Lord will establish you as his holy people, as he swore he would do. Then all the nations of the world will see that you are a people claimed by the Lord, and they will stand in awe of you. The Lord will give you prosperity in the land he swore to your ancestors to give you, blessing you with many children, numerous livestock, and abundant crops. The Lord will send rain at the proper time from his rich treasury in the heavens, and will bless all the work you do. You will lend to many nations, but you will never need to borrow from them. If you listen to these commands of the Lord your God that I am giving you today, and if you carefully obey them, the Lord will make you the head and not the tail, and you will always be on top and never at the bottom. You must not turn away from any of the commands I am giving you today, nor follow after other gods and worship them. So this is the blessings part of this long chapter of prophecy here. And some of these prophecies, many of these, were fulfilled in ancient Israel during the times that they obeyed God. And as a result of King David's righteous rule and God's blessings on him, ancient Israel became a great nation in that part of the world during David's years, his latter years, and during the reign of his son and successor Solomon. During this period, the other surrounding kingdoms like Egypt and Babylon and the Hittites and so on, the Syrians to the north, were not that strong. So Israel grew very powerful in what you might call a power vacuum at that time. And they could have remained that way had they obeyed. But we know the story. Solomon became king, started out great, was incredibly blessed with wisdom, with wealth and power. But we know that he let his many wives and concubines turn his heart from God into idolatry. And at his death, the kingdom split into the separate kingdoms of Israel and Judah. And it then took several centuries, but Deuteronomy tells us exactly what would happen to both of those kingdoms if they chose not to obey God. And the bottom line is they lost their privileged and blessed status. They rotted out, they decayed out from within, and they were both taken away into captivity and destroyed as nations. I would refer to it as national suicide. It was self-inflicted. They did it to themselves by their choices. So now let's consider. Let's jump forward from the times of ancient Israel being blessed during David and Solomon's reign. Let's fast forward now to the United States, and have a map here from our U.S. and Britain and Bible prophecy booklet. And the United States started out with the colonies, the British colonies there in northeastern what is now the northeastern United States, then expanded down the southern, the east, expanded south along the eastern seaboard there. So you can see there in darker green the original 13 colonies. And then you can see how it progressively spread across the continent, different territories, the Midwest there, then the Louisiana Purchase in 1803 that pretty much doubled the size of the nation. Then the Texas annexation, then California and much of the Southwest there for 1848, from when it was ceded to us from Mexico as a result of the war with Mexico, and then the Oregon Territory in 1846. So the United States started out these very, very fragile colonies along the eastern seaboard. And what started out as these few poor colonies, barely managing to survive at times, expanded across the width of an entire continent. And then after gaining independence from Britain in 1776, within 2 centuries, America had become, during World War II, the world's greatest superpower. And the story of the rise of the British Empire is similar to that. This tiny island nation about the size of Michigan that came to rule the greatest empire the world had ever known. And both of these became great not because of anything that was inherently better about the people, but because of God's promised blessings to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob that were fulfilled through these peoples. And the British and American people did, for the most part, believe in God and tried to do their best to live by God's word. And as a result of that, both Britain and the United States became great blessings to the entire world. They abolished the curse of slavery. They civilized much of the known world. They came up with great inventions that blessed all of humanity. They took the Bible to most of the known world. They saved the world from Nazism and World War II, and then from communism during the Cold War period. And it's very sad and ironic that today we see history being rewritten and all of this history being turned upside down. America and Britain are declared to be the oppressors of the world. Christianity is being depicted as a curse on the world instead of a blessing. And now socialism and communism, which we fought wars to prevent, are being touted as the way to save the world from the supposed curse of Western civilization. So just a remarkable story of God's blessings and how all those blessings are now being viewed by much of the world as curses. So getting back to our story there in Deuteronomy, we'll continue with this prophecy of national greatness and how these prophecies were fulfilled. So if they would obey, verse 10, then all the nations of the world will see that you are a people claimed by the Lord, and they will stand in awe of you. The Lord will give you prosperity in the land he swore to your ancestors to give you, blessing you with many children, numerous livestock, and abundant crops. Actually, I think I already read that part here. Um, I'll just go ahead to reinforce it in our minds. The Lord will send rain at the proper time from his rich treasury in the heavens and will bless all the work you do. You will lend to many nations, but you will never need to borrow from them. And America was truly an incredibly fertile land with abundant natural resources and a wonderful climate where these blessings could and would be fulfilled. Continuing, verse 13, if you listen to these commands of the Lord your God that I'm giving you today, and if you carefully obey them, the Lord will make you the head and not the tail, and you will always be on top and never at the bottom. Do not turn aside to the right or the left from all the things I am commanding you today, and do not go after other gods to worship them. So this is a summary of the story of the growth and blessings of ancient Israel, and now in more modern centuries, the modern English-speaking nations. So this might be a good time here to stop and ask for questions or thoughts. We are running a little bit behind schedule here, but if anyone has questions or comments you'd like to make, this would be a good time to break for that. And if not, I'll keep going.
Yes, I had a question, Scott. My name is Brandon. I'm in the Redlands area.
Yes.
So for Deuteronomy chapter 28, should we be reading this as the prophecy speaking to individuals or to a nation as a whole? I mean, I'm pretty sure it's dual meaning, but what was it meant for when it was written?
Yeah, good question. Specifically, it's written to the nation of Israel. God inspired Moses to write it, and it's more or less the capstone of the five books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And it's very near the end of that, so it's kind of so some commentators refer to it as Moses' last sermon to Israel because he dies not long after giving this. So it's specifically directed to the nation, but the principles in there are the same with individuals as well. Obey God and you're blessed. Disobey God and you're cursed. It's a principle from the book of Galatians. We reap what we sow. And yeah, that is a very good summary of this entire chapter, that you sow good and you'll reap good. You sow evil and you will reap evil and the consequences of that. So yeah, specifically to a nation, but definitely works on an individual level as well. So good question. Anything else then?
I wanted to comment.
Sure.
Who is this, please?
Bill Bruce.
Okay, go ahead, please.
My comment is that what you just said, but unfortunately, those of us that are maybe good are still going to have to suffer because of some of the things the rest of us of them have done. That's all I was going to say.
Oh, that's very true, and we see that in what's playing out there in the LA area right now. I mean, I don't have to have to comment on the culture of the LA basin there, but yeah, the good do suffer along. Yeah, we suffer along with the culture and the civilization and society as a whole. If the society and culture are good and righteous, we're blessed alongside them. Even evildoers are blessed because of the overall thrust and direction of the culture. But at the same time, if the culture is on a wrong trajectory, a wrong path, well, crime, for example, I live in a suburb of Denver, and crime has skyrocketed in recent years, and that's one of the reasons I chose this subject tonight. So the good suffer along with the bad. We've had members who've had their cars stolen, broken into, everything stolen out of them. There, did the member do anything wrong? No, it's just unfortunately we have officials who won't enforce the laws that are on the books, so we suffer alongside them. And uh, Southern California is, I'm not trying to lay the blame on any one or any group, but God does promise rain in due season, as we just read in here, for those who are obedient to God. But we'll see the flip side of that later on when we get into the curses portion of it. So yeah, very cogent observation there. So. Okay, I'll go ahead and continue now with the prophetic story. We've read about the blessings that God promises for nations that obey Him. And this was true for the United States, for the British people. Incidentally, I might pass on here an observation from John Ross Schrader, who writer for our publications for many years, who unfortunately passed away several years back. But John was an American. He was a Texan by birth, but he lived for a number of decades over in Britain and was part of the British office staff there. And he said, if you want to see what's happening in prophecies of Israel in the end time, Britain is about 10 years ahead of where the United States will be. And he told me that probably 20, 25 years ago, and I've always kept it in mind. And if you look at what's happening in Britain now, with the crime, with all the multicultural issues, the unfettered immigration, the rise of Islam to the point that the London mayor, the mayors of many of the major cities in Britain are Muslim. The culture is being transformed and is falling apart before our very eyes. And it would not surprise me if within the next few months the British government falls, because they're so ultra liberal there and so woke that if they had a vote right now, they would be the Liberal Party would be voted out of office there. No question about it. All the polls show them badly losing to conservative. Same thing that just happened in Canada with Pierre Trudeau's resignation from office. So yeah, that thought just popped into my mind. If you want to see where the United States is heading, just look at Britain. John said 10 years ahead. I would say it's more like 5 years in recent years. But that's the trajectory. And John knew it. He lived there. So continuing with this, verse 14, do not turn aside to the right or to the left from all the things I am commanding you today, and do not go after other gods to worship them. So verse 15, but if you refuse to listen to the Lord your God and do not obey all the commands and decrees I am giving you today, all these curses will come and overwhelm you. Your towns and your fields will be cursed. Your fruit baskets and breadboards will be cursed. He's taking the same elements that earlier were promised to be great blessings. Now he's saying all of these same things will now be cursed. Your children and your crops will be cursed. The offspring of your herds and flocks will be cursed. Wherever you go and whatever you do, you will be cursed. I might mention here, backing up to that previous verse about your fields, your fruit baskets, your crops will be cursed. For decades, the United States was a net exporter of food to the world. But that changed as recently as 2005, 20 years ago. Now, surprisingly enough, the United States is a net importer of food. A net importer of food. And that just seems shocking considering the agricultural productivity of California, the Central Valley there. of the American Midwest and all the wheat and corn. And we do export a lot of wheat and corn, but we import more of nearly everything else that we eat. We no longer produce enough food to feed ourselves. We should be able to. We did that for decades, but we can't do it any longer. So our fields here, our agricultural productivity, in other words, perhaps the best in the world at one time, is clearly being cursed now. We can no longer feed ourselves as a nation. Wherever you go, verse 19, and whatever you do, you will be cursed. Okay, I already read that. The Lord himself will send on you curses, confusion, and frustration in everything you do, until at last you are completely destroyed for doing evil and abandoning me. Are we seeing curses and frustration and confusion in our country today? One of the most defining moments in our nation's recent history was the George Floyd riots from several years ago. Who was George Floyd? He was a career criminal who had done at least 4 separate stints in prison for multiple crimes, usually drug possession or selling drugs, but also once for putting a loaded pistol into the belly of a pregnant woman and threatening to kill her unless she told him whether she had money or drugs in the house that he could steal. And George Floyd got killed in the act of passing a counterfeit bill to buy cigarettes and was resisting arrest. And at the time of his death, he had enough drugs in his system to kill a normal person. But because of his death, the nation and many of its political leadership went insane. Now, let me make clear, I'm not saying that he deserved to die. But most of us learned a long time ago from our Bibles that if you do enough stupid things, eventually it's going to catch up with you. And George Floyd had methamphetamine in his system. He had fentanyl in his system. I believe he had marijuana in his system. Had several other drugs, and he had multiple underlying health issues with his heart. And in any normal world, these would be called occupational safety hazards if you choose as your occupation a life of crime. And some career choices are more dangerous than others. So if you choose a career as a criminal, it's likely not to end well. You're not going to live a long and happy life. But because of the death of this thug, and that's what he was, he had also fathered 5 children out of wedlock, the nation simply went insane in an orgy of violence and lawlessness and rioting in which more than 20 people died, many of them who were themselves black, including at least 4 black law enforcement officers. And I don't like even mentioning race here because there is one race we're a part of. That's the human race. We're all made in God's image. But the reason I mention this is we have been cursed with a spirit of absolute confusion and chaos and frustration and deception and destruction, to the point that many people and various political leaders are calling for getting rid of the police, the very people who maintain law and order and keep others safe. And all of this makes absolutely no sense at all. And an observation I made a number of times before, when you see things that don't make any sense at all on the physical level, you can be sure there is something going on behind the scenes on a spiritual level. And I think that is so clear in what has happened to our nation in recent years. When things make no sense on the physical level, like defunding the police, there's a spiritual force at work that we don't see. Well, we can perceive that it's at work, but we don't physically see it with our eyes. But we are clearly seeing that right now on so many levels of society and even among our national leadership. We are seeing curses and confusion and frustration in everything that you do, as is worded here in Deuteronomy. And that perfectly sums up our headlines. And then God continues in verse 21, the Lord will afflict you with diseases until none of you are left in the land you are about to enter and occupy. I want to share a few shocking statistics here. These are fairly recent, a few years old, but quite recent. These are from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention about the current state of the American population. 6 in 10 adults in the United States have a chronic disease. 6 in 10. That's 60%. That's more than half. 4 in 10 adults in the United States have 2 or more chronic diseases. That's 40%. That's part of the 60%, but it shows the magnitude of our health issues. U.S. annual health care costs total $3.5 trillion per year. That's approximately $10,000 in health costs per person per year. These numbers are just stunning, absolutely shocking how bad they are. More than half of our adult population has a chronic disease. And the average cost of this is about $10,000 per person per year. Here's another bullet point. Key lifestyle risks are smoking, poor nutrition, poor diet, in other words, lack of exercise, and excessive alcohol use. So much of this is self-inflicted. Much of this curse, or this national curse on our health, is self-inflicted here. Do our lifestyle choices have consequences? You bet they do. Absolutely they do. Continuing beyond this, the Lord will strike you with wasting diseases, fever and inflammation, with scorching heat and drought. And I can't help but think about this and what's going on there in California right now. And with blight and mildew on your crops. These disasters will pursue you until you die. The skies above will be as unyielding as bronze, and the earth beneath will be as hard as iron. The Lord will change the rain that falls on your land into powder, and dust will pour down from the sky until you are destroyed. So this is obviously talking about severe drought conditions, and I live in Colorado, climate quite similar to California, fairly arid, quite dry. We get about 14 to 15 inches of precipitation a year, mostly in the form of snow. So we're very susceptible to drought. We're a high desert area, like much of the southwestern region here of the United States. And try as we might, we can't control the weather, but God can control the weather, and He does control the weather. And when, because of our defiance, He reaches the end of His patience and decides to withdraw the blessings of rain and due season and good weather, the kind of fires that we're seeing and the kind of drought as depicted in this photo are the result. And if you think food prices are bad now, and they clearly are, just wait until the nation gets hit with a prolonged drought or hail or floods or blight or mildew that were mentioned that we just read, or whatever else that can come along and wipe out crops. You might do some reading about the Dust Bowl, what it was like a little less than a century ago, and how that devastated entire states across the middle of the United States, where farmers stood and looked out their window in these high winds and watched literally tons and tons of topsoil blow away. And there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop it. A good book about that, if you're interested, is one called The Worst Hard Time. The Worst Hard Time. That's about the American Dust Bowl here. So these are some of the consequences of the choices we make as a nation. Another aspect of prophecy here, verse 25, the Lord will cause you to be defeated by your enemies. You will attack your enemies from one direction, but you will scatter from them in seven. You will be an object of horror to all the kingdoms of the earth. The last, let's do a little quick dive into history here. The last war that the United States won was World War II. That was 80 years ago. 80 years ago. And even then, for the last 80 years, we've had to keep soldiers stationed around the world, including in Germany, which we defeated in World War II, to keep the peace. After World War II, in less than a decade, we had another war in Korea that we did not win. That war was settled by a truce, an armistice. And the only reason it hasn't broken out into war again is we have had to keep tens of thousands of soldiers stationed there for more than 70 years now in Korea to keep the peace. Next came, about a decade later, Vietnam. And in result of that long war of attrition, we turned it over to the South Vietnamese, declared victory, and went home. After which Vietnam and Cambodia became communist killing fields in which hundreds of thousands of people were slaughtered. And ironically, we have today thousands and thousands of our American college students demanding what? Demanding socialism and communism, exactly what we had fought against in Korea and Vietnam. Then we had the first Iraq war after Iraq invaded Kuwait. And we defeated Saddam Hussein, but we left him in power because of lack of international support. So then there was a second Iraq war, which led us to having troops in Iraq for about 20 years. Then there was the Afghanistan war for another 20 years. And there we had a chaotic retreat, leaving the Taliban with tens of billions. I think it was 60 to 70 billion dollars of advanced military equipment and gear abandoned to the Taliban. And all of these wars over 80 years now, which have brought no conclusive victories in that time, have cost us literally trillions and trillions of dollars and tens of thousands of lives. God prophesied, I'll break over to read from Leviticus 26, a parallel chapter here, where God says in verse 19, I will break the pride of your power because of our sins. And we've long referred to the way this is phrased, and it is so accurate that we have had the world's most powerful military for the last 80 years, but we simply no longer know how to use that power effectively against those who wish to destroy us. So we let far lesser nations pick away at our strength and slowly defeat us in wars of attrition until we give up and go home. We're at the state now we can't even defend our own borders anymore, and millions, literally millions of strangers and hundreds of thousands of potential enemies have crossed the border in recent years. So again, I read through this chapter and it's like reading our headlines over the last few years. And eventually it gets so bad, God says, continuing, your corpses will be food for all the scavenging birds and wild animals, and no one will be there to chase them away. The Lord will afflict you with the boils of Egypt, and with tumors, scurvy, and the itch from which you cannot be cured. The Lord will strike you with madness, blindness, and panic. Let's look at a few more statistics about madness, blindness, and panic. And this too is quite shocking. This is from the website mentalhealthfirstaid.org. In the United States, almost half of adults, 46.4%, will experience a mental illness during their lifetime. Almost 5% of adults, defined as those 18 or older, experience a mental illness in any 1 year. 5%. It's 1 out of 20 in any given year, which is the equivalent of 43.8 million people. Another bullet point of adults in the United States with any mental disorder in a 1 year period, nearly 14.5% have one disorder, nearly 6% have two disorders, and 6% have three or more mental disorders. Now, they didn't exactly define what they classify as a mental disorder. I just find, and frankly, sometimes it's hard to tell anymore because now we've reached the point that we have leaders and our intelligentsia telling us that transgenderism and homosexuality are normal, and pedophiles are simply the new term for them is quote minor attracted individuals end quote. So I'm not exactly sure how they define mental illnesses when they're defining genuine mental illnesses as normal. Continuing, another set of statistics, half of all mental disorders begin by age 14 and 3/4 by age 24. So this is something that is starting showing up younger and younger, even into the teen years and early adulthood here. So I have no doubt that with the changes we are seeing in society and the rejection of God are leading to an epidemic of mental disorders here. Another bullet point, in the United States, only 41% of the people who had a mental disorder in the past year received professional health care or other services. Some other statistics, this is from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. About 1 in 6 children aged 3 to 17 years were diagnosed with a developmental disability, as reported by parents during a study period of 2009 to 2017. That's 1 in 6 again. And these disorders or disabilities included autism, attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder, cerebral palsy, among others. So again, an astonishingly high number, 1 in 6. And combine that with what we read just a minute ago, almost half of adults will experience a mental illness in their lifetime. Are people, as we read here, being stricken with madness, blindness, and panic? And obviously we are. And verse 29, God through Moses says, "You will grope around in broad daylight like a blind person groping in the darkness, but you will not find your way." And this is what our society has become from rejecting God. It's become a culture of blind people, groping in the darkness, unable to find our way. Continues, "You will be oppressed and robbed continually, and no one will come to save you." And we all know that crime is way up, but we're supposed to pretend that it's not. And our leaders, our political leaders, don't rescue us from crime. They do away with laws. This has happened here in Colorado. Or they redefine crime to make the statistics look a lot better. Or they simply don't enforce the laws, and everybody suffers, as I commented earlier. Continuing with these trends, I skipped over a verse 30. "You will be engaged to a woman, but another man will sleep with her. You will build a house, but someone else will live in it." You might think about squatters these days. "You will plant a vineyard, but you will never enjoy its fruit." And again, all of these things we see them literally happening these days. Continuing, "Your ox will be butchered before your eyes, but you will not eat a single bite of meat. Your donkey will be taken from you, never to be returned. Your sheep and goats will be given to your enemies, and no one will be there to help you. You will watch as your sons and daughters are taken away as slaves. Your heart will break for them, but you won't be able to help them. A foreign nation you have never heard about will eat the crops you worked so hard to grow. You will suffer under constant oppression and harsh treatment. And at the time this was given, this would have been referring to invasion by foreign enemies. But today we're dealing with a literal foreign invasion that is destroying our wealth, destroying our property, our standard of living, and all for no good reason at all. And in the meantime, we're being taxed to support it. So when he talks about our property, our animals, donkeys, livestock being taken for us, our house taken from us, our property being taken from us, well, what's happening through taxation these days? Our individual familial wealth, personal wealth is being taken away from us by government to support all these crazy things that they spend money on. And we're being taxed to pay for all of this. And the nation, as a result, grows weaker and weaker. Continuing, you will go mad because of all the tragedy you see around you. The Lord will cover your knees and legs with incurable boils. In fact, you will be covered from head to foot. The Lord will exile you and your king to a nation unknown to you and your ancestors. There in exile, you will worship gods of wood and stone. Comment about the diseases that are mentioned here. I might mention that in our nation, we're seeing bluntly breakdown of our health and sanitation systems. Where diseases that were long ago banished, like leprosy, like tuberculosis, polio, measles, things like that were eradicated decades ago in our country, are now reemerging and spreading in our bigger cities, largely in homeless encampments, but also through immigrants that are allowed into the country from third world countries. And now those infections are spreading again among American citizens. And our governments are willingly allowing all of this to take place. Continuing, verse 37, you will become an object of horror, ridicule, and mockery among all the nations to which the Lord sends you. And this is literally what happened to ancient Israel and Judah. They rotted out from the inside. Eventually, they were invaded by and carried into captivity by hostile enemies. And a nation that becomes weak is like a wounded or sick animal. And the predators prey on that weakened animal. And that is a pattern throughout history, and we will not be an exception. Continuing, you will plant much, but harvest little, for locusts will eat your crops. You will plant vineyards and care for them, but you will not drink the wine or eat the grapes, for worms will destroy the vines. You will grow olive trees throughout your land, but you will never use the olive oil, for the fruit will drop before it ripens. You will have sons and daughters, but you will lose them, for they will be led away into captivity. Swarms of insects will destroy your trees and crops. They will lend, excuse me here. I seem to have, I missed a slide here. Okay, I'll go ahead and read it. All right, let me back up. Sorry, I want to, verse 44, I wanted to, verse 43, the foreigners living among you will become stronger and stronger while you become weaker and weaker. They will lend money to you, but you will not lend to them. They will be the head and you will be the tail. The last time we had a trade surplus in the United States was 1975, 50 years ago. For the last 50 years, we have imported more goods and services than we have exported. And sooner or later, we're going to have to pay the price for that. Deficits from 1976 to 2008, 232 years, we ran up a total debt of $10 trillion. Took us 232 years. During the 8 years of the Obama administration, our national debt almost doubled in only 8 years compared to 232 years. During the first Trump administration, we added another $8 billion in debt, bringing us to almost $28 trillion. During the Biden administration, we've added another $6 trillion in debt, bringing us to about $34 trillion. So in the last 16 years, our national debt has tripled just in 16 years. It's now roughly $100,000 for every man, woman, and child in the United States. We are the most debt-laden country in the history of the world. I could give many other statistics, but you get the idea. Continuing, verse 45, if you refuse to listen to the Lord your God and to obey the commands and decrees he has given you, all these curses will pursue and overtake you until you are destroyed. These horrors will serve as a sign and warning among you and your descendants forever. I thought I'd missed a slide, but actually I hadn't. I just jumped ahead. If you do not serve the Lord your God with joy and enthusiasm for the abundant benefits you have received, you will serve your enemies, whom the Lord will send against you. You will be left hungry, thirsty, naked, and lacking in everything. The Lord will put an iron yoke on your neck, oppressing you harshly until he has destroyed you. So basically what God is saying here is, because you have refused to serve me in a land in which I tremendously blessed you, because that is the choice you've made, you will instead get to serve your enemies, who will brutally oppress you. But this is your choice. You made the choice, and you're going to have to live with it. Verse 49, the Lord will bring a distant nation against you from the end of the earth, and it will swoop down on you like a vulture. It is a nation whose language you do not understand, a fierce and heartless nation that shows no respect for the old and no pity for the young. Its armies will devour your livestock and crops, and you will be destroyed. They will leave you no grain, new wine, olive oil, calves or lambs, and you will starve to death. They will attack your cities until all the fortified walls in your land, the walls you trusted to protect you, are knocked down. They will attack all the towns in the land the Lord your God has given you. The siege and terrible distress of the enemy's attack will be so severe that you will eat the flesh of your own sons and daughters, whom the Lord your God has given you. And this is pretty gory, but it's talking about what did happen to ancient Israel and Judah during the invasions by the Assyrians and the Babylonians, as well as the Roman siege of Jerusalem in AD 70. So we shouldn't think that it can't happen again. The most tender-hearted man among you who will have no compassion for his own brother, his beloved wife, and his surviving children. He will refuse to share with him the flesh he is devouring, the flesh of one of his own children, because he has nothing else to eat during the siege and terrible distress that your enemy will inflict on all your towns. The most tender and delicate woman among you, so delicate she would not so much as touch the ground with her foot, will be selfish toward the husband she loves and towards her own son or daughter. She will hide from them the afterbirth and the new baby she has born, so that she herself can secretly eat them. She will have nothing else to eat during the siege and terrible distress that your enemy will inflict on all your towns. And this is gruesome, but it's the reality of the ancient warfare, of invasion and siege warfare, where an army would come in and surround a town or a city, and all that the people have to eat is what they have within the city walls. Today, we don't have city walls, we don't have centralized city food storage like they had then, and we don't have enemy armies marching over the horizon. So how might something like this happen today? Well, many people don't realize how fragile our food distribution network is. Grocery stores typically only have about 3 days of food in stock before the shelves are bare. It's why when you see a hurricane coming to Florida, the store shelves get emptied there. Everything's gone from the store. There might be another 3, 4 days of food in the warehouses, in the trucks, in the freight cars, and so on in the overall distribution system. So basically, in our society today, there's about a week's worth of food in the stores and in the distribution system. What happens when that is gone or when that system is disrupted? It's simply every man for himself. And desperate people do desperate things, as we just read about here, resorting to things like cannibalism. And when the food runs out, civilization breaks down, people start looting and killing on a massive scale, and people will literally do anything to survive. I was going to go into an interesting book. You might want to write down the title of this, called 1 Second After. It's I recommended it to Mr. Weber and Mr. McNeely about 10 years ago when I read it. It's a fiction book, but it's written by a military historian, and it describes what happens in a small town when an electromagnetic pulse hits, and it wipes out everything electronic in the town, all phones, all refrigeration, all engines, car engines, radios, TVs, computers, all the power system goes down, and people are instantly thrust back to using the technology of the 1800s. And I won't tell you the ending of the book, but it's a very sobering read. And the author was actually invited to address the United States Congress about the dangers of electromagnetic pulse weapons. And he addressed the U.S. Congress, and nothing happened. So he was urging the Congress to start making preparations to protect the country from this type of attack. And nothing happened, and we are still as vulnerable as we ever were. So if you want a frightening look at one way the country could be brought down with just a handful of nuclear weapons, and we have China, we have North Korea, we have Russia with nuclear weapons, we have Iran well on the way to nuclear weapons, all of whom would love to see us destroyed. And this book gives a very plausible story of what happens in a year's time after an electromagnetic attack. So we'll go into this in more detail. You can read it yourself. But continuing, if you refuse to obey all the words of instruction that are written in this book, and if you do not fear the glorious and awesome name of the Lord your God, then the Lord will overwhelm you and your children with indescribable plagues. These plagues will be intense and without relief, making you miserable and unbearably sick. He will afflict you with all the diseases of Egypt that you feared so much, and you will have no relief. The Lord will afflict you with every sickness and plague there is, even those not mentioned in this book of instruction, until you are destroyed. Though you become as numerous as the stars in the sky, few of you will be left because you would not listen to the Lord your God. Just as the Lord has found great pleasure in causing you to prosper and multiply, the Lord will find pleasure in destroying you. You will be torn from the land you are about to enter and occupy. For the Lord will scatter you among all the nations from one end of the earth to the other. There you will worship foreign gods that neither you nor your ancestors have known, gods made of wood and stone. There among those nations you will find no peace or place to rest. And the Lord will cause your heart to tremble, your eyesight to fail, and your soul to despair. Your life will constantly hang in the balance. You will live night and day in fear, unsure if you will survive. In the morning you will say, if only it were night. And in the evening you will say, if only it were morning, for you will be terrified by the awful horrors you see around you. Then the Lord will send you back to Egypt in ships, to a destination I promised you would never see again. There you will offer to sell yourselves to your enemies as slaves, but no one will buy you. And so ends this chapter on prophecy, a prophecy of great blessings and national greatness for obedience, which have been fulfilled both in ancient Israel and in modern Israel, and a prophecy of decline and collapse for uh, nations that turn their backs on God. Why does this happen? The descendants of Israel have been blessed unlike any other nations in all of history. They've been blessed with great military victories, great miracles, time and time again. They've been given unparalleled access to God's Word, the Bible. They've even spread the Bible throughout the world. They were told, we read earlier, they should be holy nations and an example of God's way of life to the rest of the world. But as we're seeing before our eyes, we're actually sinking lower in our corruption and perversion and rebellion against God than other nations who know nothing about God. And our nation has made these choices. We've banned the Bible from schools back in the 1960s, banned it from public life. We banned prayer, told God we don't want to listen to him or we don't need to talk to him. We legalized abortion and told God that we think that human life is worthless. And then we wonder why so many of our teenagers, high school, junior high students even, pick up guns and go in and shoot up their schools. When we told them we think human life is worthless. And we've more recently trashed God's instruction about marriage and legalized practices that God calls an abomination. The bottom line is God does not have to curse the nation. We've cursed ourselves because of our choices and our sins. And we're seeing that playing out on the national stage. Abraham Lincoln said many years ago, "From whence shall we expect the approach of danger? If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we will live forever or die by suicide." And today we are in many ways seeing our nation die by self-inflicted suicide. Sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, the trajectory or the pace speeds up or slows down, but the overall trajectory is the same. Deuteronomy 28 tells us that trajectory in great detail and why this is happening and where it leads. So for us as God's people, as God's spiritual Israel, we need to be sure we keep our nose in God's word, that we draw close to him, that we seek and pray for discernment, that he gives us eyes to see and ears to hear, and that may we all see the reality of what is taking place and to not allow ourselves to get caught up in these trends and suffer the consequences. So that's all of my presentation. So we do have a little bit of time here left for questions or comments.
Scott, we do have some questions I'm looking at on the chat line. If you
Okay.
could draw your attention to that.
All right. Let me do that. I've stopped sharing. Okay.
Especially two or three down. There's one on about the Muslims and in the United States of America. And perhaps this also pertains to the United Kingdom.
Sure. Yes. I was specifically referring to the United Kingdom, Britain, England, but also into Scotland as well. Uh, many Muslim nations used to be part of the British Empire. Um, Egypt, much of North Africa, Pakistan, um, Bangladesh, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, um, and as a result of them, no, not all of these were part of the British Empire, but Turkey, for instance, was conquered by the British after during World War One. But because of that, England has long had a policy of allowing people to move in from their empire. So you go to London, as I have several times. If you've ever been there, you know what I'm talking about. You feel like you're in a foreign country because you see many Muslims, many Black Africans, and they are from places like Nigeria, Kenya, other places that were British territories formerly. So yeah, Britain has had a very uh, open borders policy toward these peoples for years and years. Uh, they have just had waves and waves of Muslim migrants in recent years with all the unrest in the last 10 or 15 years in the Middle East with the dictatorships that have fallen and all the Muslim refugees from Syria, from Lebanon, from Egypt, and so on pouring into Europe. And many of those have ended up in British cities. They get voting rights and they vote in other Muslims to run the country. So the mayor of London is Muslim, mayor of Liverpool is Muslim, mayor of Birmingham is Muslim. These are some of the cities I've read about in recent years. Um, the
I believe the Prime Minister of United Kingdom.
uh,
I
he is
may be mistaken, but
actually Hindu, I believe.
okay, yeah.
What I'm thinking about, but the head of Scotland was a Muslim of all places. I'm Scottish, so uh, but yeah, in the United States, the Teddy Kennedy in the late 1960s, I believe it was. Not very few people are aware of it, but up until this, it was a bill written by Ted Kennedy. Up until that time, immigration preference had always been given to white Europeans, Scots, Germans, French, Italians, British, and so on. So that's where most of our legal immigration came from Europe. In the 1960s, I want to say it was around 68 or 69, there was a new law that was passed that totally flipped that and put white Europeans at the very bottom of the list for legal immigration and moved Black Africans. And again, I'm trying not to make this a racial thing. I'm just trying to explain what has happened historically and how it happened. And also moved Asians to the top of the list. Now, we use the word Asians and we think of Chinese and Japanese. No, the Asians that were in the bill are from Pakistan and India. So, in other words, predominantly Muslim Pakistanis that were brought into the country. So, these are the people who, for several decades now, have been given immigration priority. That's legal immigration priority status. So, that's why we see very few white Europeans coming into the country and haven't for several decades now. Very few. There are some, but very few. What we have seen legally brought in is Muslims, people of every other religion, Hindus, and so on. They've been given preference by government policy, by one particular political party to increase the numbers of people who will vote for them. And of course, they deny that that is their motivation for allowing unprotected borders and plenty of undocumented migrants from other countries now, but history shows what their motivation. They laid their cards out on the table with that immigration bill. They want to change the population of the United States to people who will support them and keep them in power. instead. So that's the short version of how that happened. So yeah, good question.
Scott, one thing in Robin Weber here, in historic dynamics,
Yep.
one thing when you even look at one of the first commandments in the Bible and looking where religion is today and looking at some of the challenging circumstances that are facing young adults, young people in America and elsewhere, is simply things aren't working, so they're not having children. And or because of more, just think of this through, because of a more secular society, one of the kind of the three commandments that are given in Genesis 2 and 3 is name the animals, bl- uh, what is it, to keep the garden, and number 3, to dress and to keep the garden, and number 3 is be fruitful and multiply. There was for many years a religious admonition that people held to in a sense of that children were a blessing. And as they were obeying God's laws, they were blessed to be able to be in an economy or in a way of life that had hope, which a lot of our younger people today are losing hope. And so they're turning inward. In the most interconnected world that has ever been through technology, we have a disconnected society and disconnected from why God made humanity. And a part of that was to reproduce, to have children, to be fruitful and multiply. When a nation like ancient Rome, as you know this being a historian, when Rome stopped having children, even it really hit them by the first century BC. That is when they started drawing more people in from the rest of the empire. A vacuum has always got to be filled. It's got to be filled one way or the other. Where there is, I'm not talking about a vacuum cleaner, but a vacuum. When there is an empty spot in many venues of history, it is going to be filled in one way or the other. And that's what we're seeing today, where, again, even if you look at the migration pattern in the United States right now, basically the domestic population that has been here, the birth rate has now gone below 2.
Yeah.
And through that, there comes a point. You look at Russia. Russia is probably going to, well, especially with the Ukrainian war going on right now, unfortunately. But there are within about the next 30 to 40 years, there are going to be 25 to 30 million less Russians because they are not keeping up. They are not, my hands better go up this way. They are not keeping up with this natural venue that God put in human society. So then other societies come in to fill the labor, to fill the needs.
Right. Yeah, very good observation. And I would add that it's even more insidious than that because, well, the birth rate of these immigrants is much higher than our American citizenry birth rate of under 2. Many of these immigrants have 3, 4, 5, 7 children, 8 children. How are those children paid for? They're paid for by our taxes.
Mhm.
Another huge factor in American adults marrying and not being able to have children is they are taxed so high they have to both work. And that has been a dramatic societal change. My mother did not work at all when I was growing up in the 60s, early 70s. Few mothers worked then.
No.
It's almost universal.
Mhm.
Basically, one spouse works to pay the taxes, and the other one works to support and feed the family or the couple, and
Mhm.
for a roof over their heads and food. So that is a really insidious impact of government policies here that is destroying and rotting away the culture and the civilization from within. So it's horrible. It's horrible. It is,
Yeah.
and I don't use that word lightly. It is utterly demonic. Uh,
Uh, Scott, can I move you to another question that's coming in? I see another question here. Do you see England, which we might call the UK, because there's more than one kingdom? Do you see the UK falling apart with King Charles' death and his son and wife coming into power? What is your take?
My take, King Charles now, who is mid 70s, if I
Yeah,
remember.
yeah, about 75.
I was thinking 74 or 75. Yeah. He is as bad a leftist as any other political leader I know of. He is very much into the green movement, and by that I mean trying to eliminate fossil fuels and go totally over to solar power and renewables. Uh, uh, that's a whole subject in itself. I don't want to get distracted by, but yeah, he is all for, as I understand it, gay rights, gay marriage, this type of thing is all for the type of immigration that is decaying and rotting out Britain from within. So he's as bad a leftist as anyone here in the United States or Justin Trudeau in Canada or anybody. He is very comfortable in those circles and with that viewpoint. So William, I really don't know anything about his political leanings because he's never been in a position to make public statements there other than just show up, for photo ops. But Charles, everything I read about him tells me is very much into the type of leftism that is destroying our our nation. Now, interestingly, I mentioned Keir Starmer, who's been the British Prime Minister for just a few months now, is really running into a buzzsaw with his policies, inflation rate, and immigration and crime, the very same issues that led to Donald Trump's election here in the United States. He's running into a buzzsaw, just like on those very same issues, just like Justin Trudeau in Canada. So there's open talk of there being elections in England soon, or rather later, in which case he will be kicked out. So it's quite possible we could have strong conservative leaders in the United States and in Canada and in Britain all at the same time here within the next few months or to a year. So that will be really fun to watch. That is really where the political power is in England, much more so than in it's more or less a figurehead without real political power.
Okay. Do we have perhaps one more question out of the class tonight for Mr. Ashley?
Robin, it's Pam Elliott here.
Well, hello, Pam.
I'd like to just mention a very interesting book, What to Expect When No One's Expecting, meaning pregnant. It's by Jonathan Last, L-A-S-T. I read this a few years ago, and he explains the population decline and explains why, even with immigration, that it declines anyway, and that Japan and Italy have already reached their point of no return.
Yes.
Just by that way of information.
And China is next.
Well, yeah, China's in trouble because of their one-child policy, and now they've got all these guys around and no spouses, and
Yeah, they threw out the women.
Yeah.
that's my husband.
There is, if I may,
He hasn't thrown me out yet.
this is Luis. There's a fairly popular commentator called Peter Zahan, and he he in his videos in YouTube, usually fairly short videos, he goes into all kinds of things, and he has examined the population crashing of India, I mean, of China, of Japan, of Korea, who else? And showing the China, for instance, there's just no recovery. And I'm thinking, if they are going to field an army together with powers of the East of 200 million people to invade the Middle East, it has to happen soon. Because in the next 20 years, their population is just going to crash. Some childbearing age women, 6 children per 1,000. I mean, this is totally catastrophic, because again, many moved from the fields into the big cities, and in the big cities, the total dynamic changes, the difficulties of schooling and moving children around, and so many more things to do than in the fields or in the country. So much more time available, so many more things with technology and power and all that you can dedicate yourself to. No time or heart for having many children. And it's just, China is trying to boost childbirth, but it's not working.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, very, very true. And in line with that, yeah, what's that is happening with Europe as a whole. There are really most of the nations of Europe, Greece, Italy, I know, Spain, Portugal, are all below replacement level. I think replacement level is like 2.7, 2.8 children per woman. And many of them are down 1.8, 1.7 along, and they're well below replacement level. So what that means, I think at that level, I think you mentioned with the example of Russia, Robin, at those kind of levels, the population halves about every 40 years, I think, something like that. So prophetically, that has huge implications for Europe as well, not just the 200 million man army, but also for Europe.
Yes.
To happen relatively soon for Europe to be that significant a power as we understand it to be.
Could I step in here for a second, Scott? I want to answer a question myself that came up. I want to make a comment here, somebody, and I fully agree with you. I just want to, it was about, Scott, when you're mentioning about just the economy today, how people need to work, both couples need to work, and you mentioned people are going to work. Versus most of our mothers would be at home in that sense, and also then they might go to quote unquote work outside of the home when we got older, in junior high or high school. And the comment came in here, I want everybody to recognize that we fully validate and appreciate every ounce of work that women put underneath a roof without ever going out to be paid for it. I'm going to share a story with you from long ago and far away. This is about 41 years ago. I was alive then. And I was a faculty member on the Ministerial Refreshing Program. And at the end, we would take questions from the ministerial audience. And we were sharing the stage that day with Dr. Hay, which was always fun because you never knew how Dr. Hay might take on a subject. And Dr. Hay made a comment. He said, ladies, if you please, you have to know the cadence of Dr. Hay. If you please, I have a question for you. He said, how many of you have worked outside of the home over the last 10 years? Dr. Hay paused for a moment, and then he smiled, and he said, you have bitten in to what society would have you to do. To think that that a woman works outside of the home rather than working every day inside of the home and making things happen, as we know that our wives, our mothers before us, throughout the day are like a mother thrush bringing goodies into the household, never stopping, just like that thrush bird, boom, 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 boom. And I would suggest, unfortunately, today our women are having to almost like Atlas having to hold up two worlds because of society and the economy. They're holding up the home, which is not a building; it's a relationship. It's a human gathering underneath the roof. They're having to put that weight on their shoulders and on their hearts every day. And then at times they have to also be working on the outside at the same time. So I want you to know, very good from the Hansons, that is our perspective. We understand that sometimes we can just get caught up or making a point, and we might say in Hebrew, we're with you. Okay, we understand. Scott, in concluding for tonight, because I'm going to make one or two final comments, anything that you'd like to share? If there was one thing that you would like us as students, your class tonight, to take away with us from this study, what would you want us to take away?
Well, let me first say, yes, I appreciate that comment too. And please don't take anything I said as being derogatory toward those who do work, toward ladies who do work outside the home. My wife has through most of our marriages as well, and it's forced by the societal situation here. One thing to take away is two levels: intellectual level.
He has the worst book problem.
Yeah, intellectual level. Deuteronomy 28 is our headlines, written down 3,500 years ago. On a personal level, we have to draw close to God and obey Him so we are not caught up in what happens to the nation, the curses that come on the nation, as described there. Yes, we can't escape it all. With inflation, we all get hit by it. With crime, we all get hit by it. We all pay the costs of that. With fires, we all get hit with that, with insurance costs and things like that. We all suffer some of the consequences, but individually and personally, that describes where our heart should be. And
Right.
that sort of thing. We've got to have our heart right in there, meshed with God and what He wants us to become.
And when you look at the ancient house of Israel, especially in Egypt, we have to recognize that God had already selected them to be His people, but they also had to go through a certain amount of the plagues. I think that's a good differentiation where God is going to be watching over His people. At times, things are going to happen. Even right now, I think bears witness with what's happened up here in LA County, is that God's people, it rains on the just and on the unjust, and things are going to happen, and God allows it beyond our own human desires or our purposes. You look to tonight, you look at Pasadena, Altadena. We've had some of those that we know in our own fellowship, the United Church of God. We have other dear brethren in the diaspora, in other fellowships in the Pasadena area, and they've lost homes. Some of this we're going to be going through, and we're not necessarily going to have the why or the no at that moment, but it's going to happen. But we recognize that as things progress, that there is going to be a certain separation, and that even as ancient Israel went through a certain amount of the plagues on Egypt, there was a time then when God put His divine umbrella over them, that His purposes for those people might be fulfilled. You look like you're going to comment, Scott.
No, I was just wondering, someone had commented, asked if you would give an update, if you know anything more about,
Yes,
so.
thank you. And I want to say some nice comments came in, Scott. Everybody really appreciates you giving this class tonight. I would say that the one update I have, I just peeked at the news to see what's going on with LA County. Another fire has broken out. It is in the Hollywood Hills. I'll let you know if you know anything about Hollywood. I did. I used to inspect it. is simply this: is that if you know where downtown Hollywood is, the Capitol Record Building, Brahman's Chinese Theater, kind of where where the 101, the Hollywood Freeway begins to bend up. You go into the Cahuenga Pass, down into the San Fernando Valley. A fire has broken out between the freeway and Laurel Canyon. I think many people have heard of Laurel Canyon. I think the Beatles had a house up there one time back in the 60s or 70s. Very nice neighborhood. It is in the Hollywood Hills. There is some brush. I would suggest, I may be wrong, it might have been a spark that came over from Brentwood or Pacific Palisades. It may be homegrown. I don't think it's going to be a major factor. It's pretty surrounded. It can do damage. It can take out a house, et cetera, et cetera. It started about 2 hours ago, but I think it is something that can be controlled. But that's what we're going to be living with in LA right now while we have these live embers and sparks that are being cast about by dynamic winds. So that's kind of the update I have on that, other than let's keep to remember our members in our prayers. And Mario, if you're still online, I'm going to ask you for the closing prayer in a moment. I just want to mention that next time on January 22nd, 2 weeks from now, we're going to have Darius McNeely, and the title of his message is the unseen hand in human history. And then 2 weeks after that, when I'll be in the month of February, I will be giving a class on the two witnesses, which I pray will be of interest to all of you. They have a dynamic, loud responsibility in the book of Revelation. There are hints of it in the Old Testament. It comes to a great fore, F-O-R-E, in the book of Revelation. And we're going to be telling you who knows who the two witnesses are. So stay on board. And number two, why two? Why two witnesses? And that's kind of where we're going to be going, and we're going to break it down to make them very, very real to you and to raise your level of awareness of what's happening in the book of Revelation. So with that, Mario, would you please ask the closing prayer if you're still online?
Sure.
And, our neighbor, my amigo, he's right here in the Los Angeles basin. They've had their fires in Orange County this past summer. And we're always glad to have Mario. Mario, could you please close in prayer, please?
Certainly. Our Heavenly Father, we come before your presence, giving you many thanks again for giving us of your Holy Spirit and opening up our minds to so many scriptures that are important, that nothing you have written there, you have said it in vain. It is something that is prophetic. And we see what's going on in the world, and thank you for the work that you're doing and for that coming kingdom that is going to solve all these problems. And please be with the families affected by these fires, and please place your holy angels about all your people, not only in this area, but around the world, as we have this nighttime with the dangers involved, that your angels will shoo away all the people that want to do us harm or to our possessions. So we thank you for this study, asking you to help us understand it deeper and keep it in our minds. In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, we ask it all. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Seekley.